And again, is it a problem statement? I don't know. But it is certainly a risk because it changes the landscape. So perhaps the most exciting thing about Project Blue is how committed LSS seems to be to the concept. They're not just putting resources into it as a format, but appear to be looking at it as a real valuable thing, and there are even rumors of supporting products. All of this is, of course, super positive for both the format's landing and its long-term success, as well as its potential for a legitimate onboarding pathway. But I do think there is an ever so slight risk associated with Project Blue that we maybe aren't considering. You're watching Budget Format Fab on Dice Commando, your BFF for all things in budget flesh and blood. Coming to you midweek each week, these videos are possible thanks to the support of our channel members. If you want to get involved with the channel and join us on our community Discord, please consider joining as a member. You can be our BFF and show your support with a like, a subscribe, and by leaving a comment. Community first, and go Commando. Hey there, my flesh and blood friends, and welcome back to the channel where we are, yes, discussing Project Blue yet again, but this time from a slightly different perspective. Now, yes, as we get into this, I do want to acknowledge, I realized there was the recent announcement about Blue not going into open beta, but I actually think that's good news in a way, and probably has to do more with what we'll talk about later, I think, in terms of, maybe some potential products. I think it's all good things. Actually, I'm pretty confident it's all good things. So, again, we're all super excited about Blue, so I'm not really worried about this. I think that this is definitely going to land, and we're going to see a lot more about Project Blue in the near future, in the upcoming months, we should say, right? Now, to that end, I do want to put out there a potential risk with respect to the format that we're going to be keeping a close eye on as things develop into the future. Now, obviously, there's a lot of community excitement around Blue for good reason, and it's more than just because it's going to be cheap fab. It's that it could potentially be Fab's answer to not only entry format like Commoner and stuff, but also short form play, maybe potentially, looking at skirmishes and stuff like that in the future and how it encroaches on Blitz and all sorts of stuff like that, right? And that's not really where we're going today, but obviously a lot of excitement around that. Now, what I wanted to talk about today, you can kind of see I have the outline out there, is let me start by outlining my thesis statement. My thesis statement is that historically, LSS has only designed really for Classic Constructed. Now, obviously, there are cards and heroes that specifically exist only in Blitz and other formats, but by and large, the vast majority of their calories and design efforts have really only existed at a Classic Constructed level. And Commoner especially really hasn't ever seen... I mean, again, we don't know what happens behind closed doors, to be fair, right? But historically, Commoner really hasn't ever gotten direct attention. Maybe they have derated some stuff in Armory decks and stuff like that to help Commoner. It's completely not only possible, but plausible that that's happened. But again, I don't think they're going out and creating cards specifically for Commoner. And my thesis statement of that is, if we start seeing products specifically designed for Project Blue, that could and probably will present a slightly different environment to that end. And I do think that there's an associated risk with that, because those cards would, of course, thus be legal in other formats, right? Maybe the risk isn't even to Blue itself, but it's to other formats. But at the very least, again, if you look at what Commoner has been, which is using what we have and doing something special with it, if Project Blue is getting things specifically designed for it, it could certainly change really what that looks like. So, kind of to paint a picture here, let's hop over to Magic the Gathering. Now, Magic the Gathering's been around for 30 plus years at this point. And about 20-ish years ago, I don't know the exact history and it doesn't matter, but we got EDH, right? Elder Dragon Highlander, which became Commander. And there is zero doubt, zero question that Wizards, Magic, started changing in a way how they designed their sets. There is no doubt that there are way more legendary cards, legendary characters, creatures, legendary creatures in Magic sets these days. There's zero question around that, right? And I'm not even talking specifically on like the precons designed for Commander. I'm talking how they've changed the design of their primary sets because they know that there's a large portion of their player base that only consumes the product in this way. So they're making stuff for that, right? So hopefully you can see where I'm going here of, to be clear, LSS is not Wizards, not saying that at all, but you can see how companies will change their practices to try and sell to different segments. So to that point, that is my point. I think that's the risk that we could see for Project Blue, specifically in that there have been rumors of Project Blue focused products. Now, that I think is a really good thing and a really exciting thing, but I want to take just a step back to 2 years ago at this point when we got Round the Table. Right? So Round the Table was obviously meant for UPF, but in order to help float that product, they put unique cards in there, right? Civic Steps, Bittering Thorns, the RTT Kitty package, the Ira deck, right? The Ira deck. Now, Round the Table was largely heralded as a success. And I'm not entirely sure what perception that's from. Certainly it sold a lot. But I do challenge that. Let me just put it this way. A lot of Round the Table was sold and opened for those cards that were in there and not for the intent of Round the Table, which was to play UPF with it. I think that's a fair statement. I don't know what percentage, it doesn't matter. But I do believe in my heart that more Round the Table was opened for the cards in it than it was for the intended purpose of it. So with that said and that understood, and again, that's not a problem statement, right? They wanted to supply a product for a specific purpose, and they used the backbone of the existing community to float and make that a profitable endeavor such that we could onboard people. It's not a problem statement. But if you take that concept and apply that to Project Blue material, hopefully you can now see kind of where I'm going with this is that they actually have an incentive to creep Project Blue as to where we are today, is my point. And to paint an example of or give an example of this, let's actually go look at equipment, because I think this is actually probably where they go first. It's kind of the lowest hanging fruit, because what do gamers always want? They want stuff that's more exciting. Right now, if you look at Commoner, if you look at Project Blue, the vast majority of because remember, Commoner can use the same equipment suite. So looking at Commoner is like a complete, almost nearly complete one-to-one in this case, right? And it's also very clear from the market moves that have been made. We talked about that a couple weeks ago at this point. We've seen a huge explosion in the Blade Beckoner series. That is kind of the fit in, if you don't have a better thing to run, you run that because it's amazing, right? So I can promise you, I'll say it today, and we can come back in 6 months once Blue's out, you're going to see complaints from the community. You're going to see complaints there's it's boring that we always have the same equipment. I want my characters to have better equipment. You're going to see that. Calling it here, and you know I'm not wrong, right? And let me know below if you think I'm wrong, but I don't think I am. So I do imagine that we're going to see equipment creep. And it may not be, power creep in the truest sense, but it kind of will be, right? Because if you look at what a functional piece of equipment is in these formats, it's Battle Worn 1 with an ability, right? We're talking Refraction Bolters. We're talking, you name it, right? The RTT Kitty stuff. Either Ironweave, yes, it's banned in Commoner and Project Blue, but you get the point, right? Battle Worn 1 with some sort of ability. That's kind of like the gold standard right now. And I do think that's what and again, when I say creep here, I don't necessarily mean they are power creeping on that. I don't think you're going to get a Battle Worn 2 with equipment, at least for many, or with an ability, for many years. But you probably will very likely see a bunch of Battle Worn 1 with ability equipment start coming. And if you really look at equipment historically, the vast majority of their design space has been in Majestics, right? For those, they've had the legendary equipment, and then about, 2, 3, maybe 4 years ago, we started getting a load of Majestic equipment that was kind of not quite as good as the legendaries, and that was your budget option at that point. And it's really kind of continued in that fashion. And that's why, again, most Commoner decks, and by extension, most Project Blue decks today play a Blade Beckoner or 2, maybe even more than that. And I do think that that's where something like that is where we start going, right? So you combine the two things of, okay, well, we're going to start creeping on equipment. We're going to start creeping on other stuff. The way to do that is via these, exclusive isn't the right term in this case, but if we're going to release a product, why would we not put some stuff in there that, hey, maybe the classic constructed players want to use too, right? I do think that's very much where we go. And that is what I'm defining as the risk of this. And I do use that with air quotes because I acknowledge I don't actually think it's necessarily a problem statement. But because of the focus and excitement around blue, which again is a good thing, but because of that, I think we are more likely to design into it versus let everything fall out and have it be a format that exists with what is there. I do think there's a very real possibility because they know that Project Blue is designed to be budget, right? So they don't want a good designer here is not going to be like, oh, I want to design a $10 commoner. That's generally right. I get the Bittering Thorns thing, but let's step off it for a sec, right? They're not going to say, oh, we're going to design a chase common, right? They're not going to do that. Instead, they're going to say, how can we make these products more marketable to that segment of the population? And the answer very clearly is what we've referred to, which is these, product exclusive cards. And I do think we're going to start seeing a lot more of that. We've also seen, if you go look at the history of the Armory deck product line, which is a little over a year old at this point, by and large, we didn't see that many rares in them. And the last couple, we've started to see more and more rares. In fact, I believe, in terms of brand new equipment, I believe the Aria deck, which came out in July, is actually the one that has, because the chess piece is rare. I think in terms of new equipment, that's the first rare we've seen. We have seen some other rares throughout the equipment, or throughout the cards, through the Armory decks. But in terms of equipment. So anyway, we may already be on that sort of downslide. And again, is it a problem statement? I don't know. But it is certainly a risk because it changes the landscape, right? And once you introduce unknown factors into something, there's always risk associated with that. So anyway, that's my piece, and that's my thought line. Let me know if you agree, if you disagree. And you know what, to be fair, you can agree and disagree and still think that my argument is fair. So I would love to hear your comments below. That'll be it for today. Nothing else, my friends. Go Commando.